In 1863, Peter works as a slave in a cotton plantation with his wife Dodie Ann and their children. When he learns he's been sold to a new owner, he spends the last moment with his family in prayer until the white men come to drag him out, ignoring the pleas from the children. Peter tries to fight back, yelling and struggling against their hold, but the men don't hesitate to aim their gun at Dodie Ann, and this instantly makes Peter stops, accepting to get on the cart on his own feet. Unfortunately, now the men want revenge, so they hit him anyway before dragging him again. Peter and a bunch of other slaves are transported in a cage as if they were cattle, and through the bars, Peter promises his children one day he'll come back for them as they try to run after him in tears. After a long time spent on the road, they arrive at their new working location, which happens to be the construction of a railroad. The conditions here are 100 times worse than in the plantations. The heads of the slaves that dared to disobey decorate the entrance as a warning. They sleep in cages, and even while they're behaving and working hard, the white masters won't hesitate to hit them and insult them. To make matters worse, they quote the Bible to justify their actions. There are also lots of feral dogs around, who are sent after any slave that tries to run away. When a slave does misbehave, sometimes they're just whipped, but other times they're shot right there in the middle of the field, and other times the boss Fassel will brand them right on the face. Fassel keeps two men as his right hands, Harrington and Knowles, who was also bought as a slave but was chosen to become part of the guards because of his hunting skills. Peter tries his best to behave, but even when he tries to help his friend Gordon when he falls, he gets yelled at for daring to do anything that isn't working. One evening, after all the slaves are sent back to their cage, they have to watch how John is thrown inside while wiggling in pain because of his branded cheek. A slave named Thomas is trembling in fear, and Peter tries to comfort him by asking him to remember his loved ones and to think of this as just work. He also offers the word of God, who is always watching over them, but John scoffs at him because clearly there isn't a God that cares about them. Peter doesn't react to the taunt though. He keeps calm and promises John to pray for him. Sometime later, Peter overhears two white guards talking about some very important news. Lincoln has freed the slaves, and now all the ones that managed to escape are running to Baton Rouge to seek help. The conversation suddenly interrupted when a guard notices Thomas made a mistake with the food and intends to punish him, but Peter comes in his defense, explaining he's just a kid. The guard hits him before taking out his gun to point it at Peter, ready to kill him for such insolence, but Fassel stops him because he's taken a particular interest in Peter because of his attitude. Later, when Peter is back in the cage, Fassel approaches him to tell him he's his god and Peter is his dog now, to which Peter replies that then he should be fed the same meat as the dogs. At that moment Fassel just laughs, but the next day, he puts Peter in chains and makes him kneel in front of him while his dog keeps barking and growling at Peter, only a few inches between them. Now the dog has committed Peter's scent to memory. Later over lunch, Peter tells the other slaves about Lincoln and Baton Rouge, which they could reach after 5 days of walking through the swamp. Some of the slaves are hesitant because surviving the swamps isn't easy, but when Peter reminds them they probably won't survive this place either, he gets the support of a few men. Now they only need to wait for the right time to escape. Sometime later, a slave dies in the middle of work, and the guards make Peter drag him to the pit where they throw all the bodies together. There are some white deserters that should be digging, but as soon as they see Peter, they say a black man should do this instead, thus Peter ends up grabbing a shovel to fill in the pit. Peter realizes this is the perfect chance for him to pull off the plan, so he waits patiently for the guards to be distracted by an explosion on the field and jumps on them to kill them with the shovel and steal a knife before running away. The other slaves and the deserters see this and take the chance to start running as well, hitting a few guards in the way, which allows John to steal a gun. Other guards raise the alarm and immediately begin shooting the runners, killing as many as possible before they're lost in the woods. Fassel does some shooting of his own too, killing the deserters, but he hates the fact Peter got away with it and calls for Harrington, Knowles, and the dogs to go after him. Peter manages to team up with 3 of his friends, and he guides them through the forest by keeping an ear up for any dangers approaching. Eventually they manage to find the swamps and most of the team doesn't have trouble crossing, but Thomas freezes when he sees the crocodiles, allowing the dogs to catch up with him. After the beasts have done enough damage, Fassel calls them back and demands to know where the group is going, but Thomas refuses to answer. This prompts Fassel to offer a deal. If Thomas tells him where the others are going, he'll allow him to leave. A terrified Thomas confesses what he knows and is indeed allowed to go into the swamp, but as soon as he turns around, Fassel shoots him and lets the crocodiles eat him. Meanwhile, Peter, John, and Gordon finish crossing the swamp safely. Peter thinks they should take the other swamps, but John won't take orders from anyone and decides to take the horse trail, feeling like he can stay safe thanks to the gun he stole. Gordon wants to follow Peter wherever he goes, but Peter thinks they'll be harder to track if they split up, so Gordon chooses his own way through the woods after Peter reminds him to follow the sound of Lincoln's cannons. Afterward, Peter begins choosing his own way, only to discover his leg is bleeding because he had been touched by a bullet after all. He needs to do something about it soon or the dogs will smell the blood, but first he needs to run for a while to put some distance between him and Fassel.